Hi, my name is Dr. John Douillard, and I want to talk to you today about how Ayurveda describes the process of how we feel and store emotion, and how we can cleanse and detoxify specifically old, unwanted emotional patterns that have been literally imprinted into your brain and literally carried in your DNA for 3 generations, according to the science. Now, Ayurveda talked about that passing on of genetic impressions as something called samskaras. And we now know that to be true, according to science. I've written articles about how they would have rabbits and they would smell a peppermint. Every time they'd smell a little peppermint, they'd get poked by a needle, and they would soon realize that that peppermint smell meant they were going to get poked. And then they didn't poke them, and for a while, and that rabbit who was sensitive to peppermint had babies, and when their babies were adults, they would poke them or have them smell the peppermint oil, and they would have a traumatic response as a result of that. In humans, this has been shown to be carried for 3 generations. So it's a very real thing. Now, how does that happen? According to Ayurveda, they mapped that out, which is just crazy, right? So we feel everything, according to Ayurveda, in our heart. This is called sadaka pitta, the emotional aspect of pitta. I've written some articles about sadaka pitta, about the emotional heart and feelings, and which I think might be a good, and I've linked them, that article in the article associated with this video about how we hold on to these emotions and how we can cleanse them. So the sadaka pitta is your feelings, and we feel everything. And those emotional feelings are then carried by the emotional aspect of Vata called Prana Vata, which carries these emotions to our brain. And it literally writes those emotions on the white matter of our brain to store them in what's called the emotional aspect of kapha, called tarpaka kapha. I know it's a mouthful, but here again, we have the sadaka pitta. We feel everything in our heart. That emotional aspect of pitta, sadaka, is then those emotions, those impressions are carried to the brain through what's called Prana Vata, the emotional aspect of Vata. And it's written on the white matter of our brain in the emotional aspect of kapha called tarpaka kapha. And it's stored there for your entire life. And even passed on genetically if it's important enough, right? So, for example, if you were a hunter-gatherer and you were wandering into a cave and all of a sudden a lion came out chasing you, you would remember never to go back into that cave again. It would create an emotional imprint that's literally written on the film of your white matter by Prana Vata, felt through sadaka, carried to the brain through prana, written on the white matter of your nervous system or tarpaka kapha through with Prana Vata. So the Prana Vata writes it on the film of tarpaka kapha, which is your white matter of your nervous system. Now, the white matter of your nervous system is the center of your brain, and it's where all the myelin sheaths are, which is a fatty layer that protects the nerve endings, sort of like the insulation on a wire that protects the wire or the current inside that wire. You know, when you strip a wire, same kind of a thing. But on that film is the imprint of all those emotions, according to Ayurveda, which is a crazy understanding. And those emotions are supposedly, Ayurveda says, are imprinted, or I should say, that all of our emotions and all of our experiences are written on the film of tarpaka kapha, which is amazing. Tarpaka is a word that means to record or to nourish, so it records everything, right? So it's pretty amazing. So now, what we also know is that 95%, according to some studies, and a handful of them, 95% of the things that we think and say and do as adults come from the first impressions experienced in the first 6 years of life. Through sadaka, carried to the brain through Prana Vata, imprinted into your tarpaka kapha, right? And those emotions are there, reserved to remotely make us think and do the same dumb stuff again and again and again. And most of us live in a very unconscious state because we're doing the same dumb stuff again and again, reacting 95% of the things we think and say and do based on things we experienced in the first 6 years of our life. It doesn't make any sense. Hard to believe that that's true, but there's a lot of studies to in fact back that up, and I've written articles about that. So it's sort of amazing, right? So tarpaka is what holds on to that unconscious behavior. Because if it's a traumatic event, we need to remember that, because the point of this body is to keep the species alive. So if there's a bear in a cave, we're going to remember that. If a traumatic event happened, an emotional event happened in your childhood, you're going to remember that. So, and even if we don't remember the details, there is an emotional impression that will make sure that you hopefully don't let yourself go into that kind of a dangerous situation again, right? So Ayurveda was like, we have to become conscious. And I've written a lot of articles and I've talked about this, but this is sort of new information, that how we can actually erase the impression on the myelin sheath, how we can actually get rid of those old emotional patterns that we don't like. Ayurveda described how that would happen. And if you were to write your name in some sand and then you would shake the sand, you could erase those impressions. In a similar way, Ayurveda used vibration through pranayama techniques and meditation techniques to actually shake the sand and erase those old emotional impressions, which I think is quite phenomenal. Now, before I tell you how to do that, tarpaka kapha also means to nourish, right? And it has to do with the cerebral spinal fluid. And I've talked a lot about that, because cerebral spinal fluid is in fact lymphatic fluid that just happens to be in your spinal canal and in the ventricles of your brain to kind of wash your brain, like a brain washing fluid. And that brain washing fluid, cerebral spinal fluid, drains out through what's called the glymphatic system, the newly discovered lymphatic system of the brain that drains 3 pounds of chemicals and plaque out of your head every year while you sleep. If you don't sleep good, your brain doesn't drain very well. And if you don't drain very well, you don't sleep very well, and bad things begin to happen. So Ayurveda was all about, hey, you know, it's really important that these brain lymphs are moving, because they understood congestion of those brain lymphatics, which are kind of along the sagittal sinus of the head across the top of the head like a mohawk haircut, and in the transverse sinuses as well. They link them to old emotional trauma, which sort of makes perfect sense, because where do you write old emotional trauma? On the myelin sheaths of your brain. And how do you get rid of those toxins if they're there? Is through the glymphatic system, which they newly discovered. And now, since they discovered them about 10 years ago now, they've linked congestion of the brain lymphatics to anxiety, depression, cognitive decline, inflammation, infection, and even autoimmune conditions, because now the master computer, your brain, the central nervous system, can't take its trash out. And if you can't take your trash out, you can't get good stuff in, your communication breaks down, and the brain, the master computer, doesn't know whether to send 1 fire truck to the fire on Main Street or 100. And that's when the immune system becomes either underreactive or overreactive. And that's sort of a bad situation. So there are studies that show when the cerebral spinal fluid is not moving very well and the lymphatics are congested, that we do see cognitive decline, memory issues, mood issues, and that can be impacted by traumatic events and chronic mild stressors. In other words, chipping away at stress throughout your life can compromise your brain lymphatics and your ability for your brain to drain. Now, for us to be able to shake the sand and actually change the emotional imprint on the white matter of your brain, the tarpaka kapha of your brain, we need good brain lymphatic function. And I've written a whole host of articles. I can't talk about that, too much to talk about, but go to my website, LifeSpa.com, and type in brain lymphatics and read all those articles that I've written about the brain lymphatics and this discovery recently about the glymphatic system and how Ayurveda talked about them thousands of years ago. And I've given you many techniques to clean them out. One of those techniques was called Nausea, which is the sniffing of oils into the sinuses. Turns out that these brain lymphatics drain into, guess where, into the lymphs in your nasal passages. So they figured out thousands of years ago, if you put oil up your nose and do a whole series of techniques, massage techniques, you can literally clean out some of those brain lymphatics, which is pretty phenomenal. And that's what the science anatomically tells us, is they drain right into the nose lymphs as well. So read my article called SAN, which means Shiro Abhyanga Nausea, or just type in SAN, Nausea, Nasya, to my website, and an article will come up giving you a step-by-step procedure of how to do this Ayurvedic Panchakarma technique right at home to clean out those brain lymphatics, which is really important. Also, when you sleep on your side, the brain lymphatics drain about 75 to 80% better than if you're on your back. So that's how you should be sleeping, is on your side, because the studies show that's when your brain drains, and your brain drains at night while you sleep. Okay, your big lymphs in your body, when you run and swim and do all that, those are your big lymphs in your muscles that are pumping through muscular contractions. They're happening during the day. But the brain, the subtle microscopic lymphs happen at night, which is why being sedentary is really bad. Because if you don't drain the big lymphs, right, during the day with movement and activity, then where are these little microscopic lymphs in your brain and central nervous system supposed to go? There's no place for them to drain. So they get backed up, and lymph stays up in your brain and creates, the things I mentioned: cognitive decline, fatigue, exhaustion. And what Ayurveda talked about is old emotional trauma, which would be really great for us to let go of, because those emotional traumas sort of give us an armor and a protection, so we don't have to feel the pain. But as we somehow forge on in our life and are able to put that pain aside and go through it, we oftentimes are able to navigate our life, move on beyond the trauma, but we don't have the depth of access that we once had of self-awareness. And Ayurveda was all about, like I said a minute ago, becoming conscious. And becoming conscious means to stop being unconscious, which means to stop reacting to 95% of the things you think and say and do from old impressions made in the first 6 years of life, or reacting to old emotional traumas, which make the biggest imprint on the film of your tarpaka kapha. So we got to get rid of that. And we got to get rid of that with a couple of techniques. So here they are. Well, the Nausea technique is one to clean out the brain lymphatics. Like I said, there's herbs for that. Bhramari, Minjisa. We have a whole bunch of herbs that I want to talk about, that I won't talk about, that I've written about, that are all about helping decongest some of the brain lymphatics. Head massage, powerful way to clean out your brain lymphatics. Lying on your left side, like I said. Nasal breathing exercise. I've written so much about that. And then, of course, breathing. Nasal breathing techniques, whether it be an exercise or pranayama, have been shown to increase cerebral spinal flow. Cerebral spinal fluid is lymphatic fluid in your brain. Lymphatic fluid in your body is called lymphatic fluid, but when that lymph gets into your central nervous system and brain, it's called CSF, or cerebral spinal fluid, which is the brainwashing fluid to get rid of all the trash. And how do you move that cerebral spinal fluid is with breathing techniques, which is really cool, right? So nasal breathing exercise, which my first book was all about, and we proved that when you exercise with your mouth closed, you actually trigger brainwave coherence and alpha production of the brain during vigorous exercise, which is literally the runner's high. We published studies on that in the International Journal of Neuroscience back in the 1990s, proving that nasal breathing can be a tool to keep you calm in the midst of stress in your life. I call it the eye of the storm. You want to live in the calm, not in the winds, which is really important. Also, pranayama techniques. Now, I've written a handful of articles on a couple of pranayama techniques I want to talk to you about. One of them is the 1-minute meditation, which is called Bhastrika. Bhastrika is the bellows breath where you breathe in and out and in and out. And please go to my website at LifeSpa.com and just type in 1-minute meditation and videos about how to do that Bhastrika/meditation techniques, 1 minute only. Really powerful. Studies show it increases parasympathetics, right? The calm, decreases sympathetic. It actually allows you to function athletically with less oxygen, so you're more efficient in your ability to perform. It actually changes the ventilation of your lungs and supports many changes in your brain because you're pumping this prana into your brain chemistry. And it gives you that ability to be, oh, wow, somehow I can take the fight or flight response down a notch, amp up my parasympathetic, and all of a sudden I'm functioning from that calm, non-thinking, feeling place, which is really important. So the Bhastrika pumps a lot of prana and moves that cerebrospinal fluid in a major way to get you better brainwashing effect, according to Yoga Ayurveda philosophy, okay? Second breathing technique that I've written about and done a video on is called Kabalabhati. Kapala means skull, and Bhate means to illuminate. So this is a technique where it's a completely different type of breathing technique, but it's literally designed to clean out your skull, which just happens to be where the tarpaka kapha imprints, or is all the emotions are imprinted on your tarpaka kapha, right? Which is pretty crazy. So they developed a technique literally named after its ability to clean out your skull and those old impressions. And that's called Kabalabhati, and I've written an article about that. Type that in to lifespa.com and look at that video as well. Another breathing technique is called Bhramari. Bhramari is the bee humming breathing technique, and studies show that it increases nitric oxide, a Nobel Prize winning molecule in 1998, the panacea molecule that cures everything, right? And Nobel Prize scientists don't generally use the word panacea ever, but they used it in 1998 when they discovered nitric oxide, which is produced only when you breathe through your nose and not at all when you breathe through your mouth. One of the reasons why pranayama is such a cool thing, because most of them are nose breathing techniques. And that's why nose breathing exercise, which I wrote about in my book, Body, Mind, Sport, in 1980, started writing in 1980, was so valuable and so important, right? So the Bhramari, which is really cool, is a humming technique where you actually plug your ears and sometimes your eyes too, and you hum. And that's the vibration needed after you breathe and create. This is really crazy stuff, the Vedic philosophy. Think about this for a second. You do these really deep breathing, in some cases forceful breathing techniques to pump so much prana into your brain. You literally feel yourself vibrating when you do these breathing techniques. And then if you were to use humming, like the bee humming vibration technique, it's almost like shaking the sand. And on the white matter of your nervous system, the myelin sheaths are a soft fat that can change with vibration. You can rewrite the emotional imprint according to Vedic philosophy by cleaning out the brain lymphatics and also using pranayama and breathing and meditation and humming, which increases the production of nitric oxide, which is the panacea molecule, 15 times than just regular nasal breathing. And mouth breathing produces 0 nitric oxide. I've written articles about that too, which I think is just insanely crazy that happens, but it's the fact, and there's hard science behind it. You can look at, type in all these breathing techniques on my website, and you can learn more about that. But that's the plan, right? So we want to somehow change the vibration of the brain so we can stop holding on to these old traumatic events, which at one point were very important to hold on to, but 20, 30 years later, you're like over it, and you're ready to let it go, and you're ready to start going into feeling deeply again, and letting yourself be vulnerable, letting yourself be delicate, letting yourself be powerful, you know? And that's what Ayurveda was about, is becoming conscious. And if we're constantly engaging in behavior unconsciously based on impressions and traumatic events in the first 6 years of our life, or traumatic events thereafter, then how can we really become conscious? We're just living based on those reactive experiences because we don't want to go into that cave with the lion anymore. And we know better. So we always walk around wondering if there's a lion in every cave, right? So Ayurveda is like, this is how it's done, is to, dip the cloth in the dye of your own silence. But your mind doesn't want you to go there. So there were techniques to allow you to feel safe, to drop into that deeper experience of your very subtle, delicate, vulnerable, yes, and most powerful self. Pretty cool stuff. Please check out this article. I'm so excited about this stuff. It just blows my mind that this is, Vedic understanding, which is now backed by a lot, not all. A lot of this is Vedic philosophy. Science hasn't caught up quite yet. I'll keep digging for it though. But a lot of it is backed by really good modern science, and I cite that along the way in the article associated with this video, so please check that out. Thanks for listening. I'm Dr. John Douillard. Do you like this video? Don't forget, to subscribe and share.
This recording is brought to you by LifeSpa, where ancient Ayurvedic wisdom meets modern science. Get access to free health video newsletters by Dr. John at lifespa.com. These statements have not been evaluated by the FDA. These products are not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease.